You're listening to Aimee Keeps It Creepy, the podcast where I share my obsession with true crime and the paranormal with you. I'm your host, Aimee Brooks. Thank you for listening to the premiere episode of Aimee Keeps It Creepy. I'm an actor. I've been in, 100 plus episodes of television and over a dozen feature-length films. You might know me, you might not. I usually get, "You look so familiar. Do I know you? Did we go to school together? Do you do porn?" No. I'm also a writer and filmmaker. What I tend to be known for, though, are the horror films. Films like Critters 3, Sorority House Massacre, Monster Man, and The Mangler. And that's cool. I love horror. It's definitely the genre I'm most drawn to. The paranormal fascinates me. Hauntings, witches, urban legends, all things creepy. I love it all. I also have a fascination with true crime. My dad was a cop, a badass detective who at one time worked on an elite SWAT team task force. I remember as a kid begging him to tell me about the latest case he was working on and how he was going to catch the bad guy. He had great stories too. Well, all cops do. Stories about gang wars, murders, and funny crime stories involving dumb criminals, which I personally love those stories because those guys always get caught and are always surprised when they do. So, if you share my obsession with true crime and the paranormal, please join me as I keep it creepy with you every week. Each episode will begin with fun facts about the week's topic. I'll go first as an example about myself. Okay, fun facts about me. Leo DiCaprio dared me to make out with him at a party when we were 17. I have been the victim of several crimes, the most notable being a drive-by shooting outside of a nightclub in Hollywood. And yes, I have seen a ghost. One of these events changed my life forever. I'll let you decide which one it is. Check out our website, creepypodcast.com, or on Instagram at creepypodcast for all the latest show news and swag. I love giving away free stuff to fans, so we will always have contests and giveaways on the show. My Patreon page has even more giveaways and bonus content, including behind-the-scenes footage, opportunities for on-set experiences, when that's safe again, and exclusive episodes of Aimee Keeps It Creepy. There's even a tier that gets monthly Zoom hangouts with me so we can talk about all things creepy. Ooh, that's going to be fun. If you haven't already and you like what you hear today, please subscribe on Apple Podcast or wherever you podcast so you never miss an episode. We really like candles on this show. Each podcast will feature a limited edition candle made by a candle story that is inspired by the creepy story we are featuring. And there will be a chance to win it for my listeners, don't worry. A Candle Story makes luxury hand-poured artisan candles that smell absolutely amazing. This week, our candle is Spill the Tea. The label has this beautiful Victorian-looking woman holding up a teacup that has a skull and crossbones on it. I love it. It reads, "Spill the tea," and it lists the scent as black tea, sweet cakes, and deadly gossip. Huh. So that's what deadly gossip smells like. I always thought deadly gossip smelled like the makeup trailer on the Days of Our Life set. Anyway, this candle smells amazing. Not like a catty soap opera set at all. If you've ever had a fancy afternoon tea with the formal teacups and the little cakes, that experience is what I smell. I'm burning it now in the studio, and it smells amazing in here. It's in a glass container with a lid that seals closed. I'm going to put these all over my house. Definitely a candle to sport on your coffee table. Follow the Aimee Keeps It Creepy Instagram page at Creepy Podcast for your chance to win. That's it. Just follow us, and you were going to do that anyway. There are several other chances to win fun stuff that you can find on the at Creepy Podcast Instagram page or on our website, creepypodcast.com. Good luck. In choosing a topic for episode 1, my mind went to one place. America's first and most notorious female serial killer, Lavinia Fisher. Here are some fun facts about this creepy bitch. Lavinia poisoned her victims with her signature sleepy tea, but stabbing them as they would wake up was her preferred method of murder. She is said to have killed dozens of men lured by her beauty. And yes, she swung for it, but not before making a famous deal with the devil. Maybe Lavinia Fisher was born around 1793. Maybe she spent most of her life in Charleston, South Carolina. Maybe. But there are no records for her. Much of her origin and early life remain a mystery to this day. She seemingly appears in history from nowhere, married to John Fisher, which makes me believe that she reinvented herself when she married John. It's my theory, but I'm just sure of it. She was running from a past that she wanted to leave behind before she became Lavinia Fisher. In the 19th century, it was much easier to move to a new town, make up your identity, start fresh. Lavinia made a great life for herself with John. They made a living operating an inn catering to the abundant travelers making their way to South Carolina. The inn was located approximately 6 miles outside of the city. They were real creative with the name, too. It was called the 6 Mile House, or simply 6 Mile House. Incidentally, there was also a 5 Mile House just a mile away that the Fishers also ran. Not much information about that in history, though. Lavinia was said to be a very beautiful and extremely charming woman. I will post the known photos of her on creepypodcast.com. And she was pretty. And she knew it, too. She used her looks to garner attention and popularity in both the Fishers' business pursuits as well as the local community, in turn creating great masks for who they really were. You see, John and Lavinia Fisher were gangsters. They were members of a large gang of highwaymen trying to rob vulnerable travelers from nearby Charleston. Their ideal marks? Wealthy men traveling alone. Lavinia would use her charm and be the hostess with the mostest to welcome these guys, entertaining them with dinner and conversation. And if they were determined to be alone and carrying enough money and valuables with them, she would offer her guests a cup of tea before bed. But unknown to the traveler, the tea was poisoned. This is when things get creepy. You see, the poisoned tea wasn't lethal enough to kill the victims. It would make them very sleepy. The guys would just think that they were tired from their travels, politely excuse themselves from Mrs. Fisher, and retire to their rooms. As the victim was on the cusp of sleep, Lavinia and John Fisher would then sneak into their room and stab them to death before stealing all their valuables. So creepy. How evil and depraved to wait until just before they sleep to kill them. The poor guys are they're dozing off, and then creepy-ass John and Lavinia jump on them wielding a knife. And what a violent death. And who exactly did the stabbing? It's unclear whether it was Lavinia or John. But something tells me that Lavinia was the boss and would watch John do it. But still, why stab? Why not just poison the guys? Poison is often a weapon of choice for women, and I think it's because it's easy. It's what I would do if I had to kill someone. Here's a story. When I was on my honeymoon, one of my honeymoons, I was on an island in the Caribbean, Nevis, very cool place, and I was drinking this thing called Planter's Punch, which is a stupid, delicious rum concoction topped with freshly grated nutmeg. I'm knocking these things back, and the bartender, who is this really wise-looking salt-of-the-earth woman, leans over to me. And I wish I could do a Caribbean accent because it would be so much more interesting, but I'm just not that good of an actor. She leaned over to me and says, "You can have as many of these as you like, but watch out how many your new husband has, because nutmeg will kill a man. Remember that if you ever need it." Good advice. I never poisoned him, even when he deserved it. But I did file that nutmeg trick into the back of my mind for future reference. And it is true. Nutmeg contains marastacin, a narcotic with toxic side effects like hallucinations and death if taken in large quantities. But ladies, please, I'm not trying to give you ideas for Thanksgiving dinner. Honey, try my apple spice pie. It's full of nutmeg. Oh my God, so creepy. I cannot be held responsible for this information. But why not just poison the tea? A nice dose of cyanide and they die. They don't even have to go and mess up the bed for the next guest. Stabbing is a messy venture. Lots of blood. Think about the cleanup involved. Do you think for 1 minute that Lavinia was cleaning up all that blood in her beautiful dresses? No. And what about the sheets? Do you know how hard it is to scrub out blood? They didn't have Oxybrite. They didn't have bleach. They were using straight lye to get out pesky stains. Lye is made from wood ash, or you may know it as potassium hydroxide. Extremely caustic stuff. And in the early 19th century, they didn't have household gloves to use. So unless there was a scullery maid involved in these murder plots, that leaves good old hubby, John, to clean up the mess. I don't believe for 1 second that she was getting those lovely hands beat up with chemicals and toil. It gives new meaning to a honey-do list. Honey, clean up the blood and guts off the wall. Honey, lie the sheets. Honey, bury the body. Okay, thanks. Well, the honey-do list takes a decidedly more grisly and evil turn. Lavinia decides that a more inventive mode of death and disposal was needed at the 6 Mile house. Honey, will you build me a blood pit? Yes. After Lavinia would poison her victim with a non-lethal dose of poison in their tea and send them off to bed, causing only drowsiness, the unsuspecting man would lay down in his bed, and just on the cusp of sleep, the Fishers would pull a hidden lever that would cause the bed to collapse, dropping out the floor beneath it, throwing the victim into a pit below where he was killed. It is claimed that this pit was filled with sharpened spikes pointing upwards to impale their victims. Oh my God. Okay, let's stop there. John Fisher must have been some kind of handyman genius to build that kind of rig. I'm lucky if I get light bulbs changed in my house. My bathroom, I'm not kidding, has a light bulb that's been out for like 4 years. Oh my God. Oops. And where exactly was this lever? Was it outside in the hallway with little peepholes hollowed out in a painting on the wall? Like in a Scooby-Doo cartoon where you see some dude's eyes looking around in a portrait? And what would happen to the bed when the floor would collapse to the blood pit below? Was it attached to the floor so the victim would be rolled out of bed and into the pit below? So many questions I have. None of these can be answered as they are lost to history. Which is weird because if I was first on the scene, I would have documented this shit, drawn some sketches or something. And think about the smell. The Fishers lived there. Think about the smell coming from the death pit below the inn. Okay, I did this movie called The Mangler Reborn. Cool movie based on a Stephen King short film. And in the movie, I was the hero escaping the clutches of a madman who built this mangler machine that would chop people up and empty out into a blood pit. At one point, I had to hide in the blood pit from the madman. Now, I was covered from head to toe in fake blood. Usually fake blood is kind of cool. You know, if you're doing a screaming scene and you get some in your mouth, it's fine because usually it has a sugar base like corn syrup. I don't recommend chugging it down, but it's not going to kill you if you get some in your mouth. Well, I'm not naming names, but the freaking genius that made the blood for this particular film added fruit for texture. Okay, fine. Kind of cool adding chunks of canned fruit cocktail and orange segments to look like guts. Except this fruit was added like 3 weeks before and sat around getting all kinds of funky on a hot set. So, as an actor, my job is to act like I'm grossed out and horrified, I wasn't acting in the scene. Because the smell was putrid. It was as if someone had died. Actually, many people, and I was covered in their various bodily glues. It's so creepy. And the directors, Matt Cunningham and Eric Gardner, they're the coolest guys. They had a bouquet of flowers waiting for me after the scene was completed. So they could take pictures of me because I look like Carrie, you know, horror film Carrie, at the prom when she's covered in pig's blood. One thing about being on a horror film set is that there are a lot of horror film geeks, me being one of them. All I wanted to do was wash the nasty, rotten blood mess off of me. But I posed for the picture to be a sport, and then I went to the shower for like an hour. People were knocking on the door to make sure I was okay. And you know what? I never even saw that photo. Anyway, the smell of fake blood pit blood was repulsive, so one can only imagine what a real bloody death pit smells like. Imagine being a traveling businessman on your way to Charleston, and you walk up to an inn that smells of straight-up death. Don't you just keep on for 6 more miles? Or 1 more mile to the 5-mile house? Just keep on going to Charleston? Or is that when pretty Lavinia opens the door and entices them in with a smile and no doubt a little flirting? Things changed, though. People in town eventually started to talk. The Fishers thought they were real smart, specifically targeting lone travelers to avoid detection, but it's bound to happen that people are going to wonder where Uncle Jeffrey went. Whether people like him or not, Uncle Jeffrey is part of the family, and Thanksgiving just wouldn't be the same without his inappropriate jokes. You know what I'm talking about. We all have that weird family member. In fact, there were frequent reports made to the local sheriff's office about missing people. An investigation was finally conducted. It was determined that in several instances, the missing individuals had last been seen at the 6-mile house. That is suspicious. Why didn't something happen then? Well, authorities said that there was not sufficient evidence to suggest that the Fishers were behind the disappearances. Interesting. I believe the charming outward appearance and popularity of the couple in town saved them from scrutiny. No complaints against the 6-mile house ever amounted to anything concrete. I bet there was gossip, though. Check out the Aimee Keeps It Creepy Patreon page, where patrons get commercial-free early access to Aimee Keeps It Creepy each week and are automatically entered in our weekly listener giveaways. Patrons also unlock exclusive videos and bonus podcasts. I post cool stuff on a weekly basis, so you have to check it out. The latest video series is my pajama party ghost hunt of my own house, which, yes, is haunted by not one, but 2 ghosts that we actually identify in the series through EVPs and historical research. Believe me, I'm equally terrified as I am annoyed at my realtor for not answering my question honestly when I asked her if the house had a paranormal past. Oh, trust me, it's creepy. And for even more creepy fun, there's an exclusive tier that gets monthly candles from a candle story and an even more exclusive tier that gets a monthly Zoom call with me to discuss all things creepy. It's going to be so much fun. Go to patreon.com/creepypodcast, or you can also find the link in the show notes or on our website, creepypodcast.com. The gang activities around Charleston were upsetting many people. It became very dangerous to travel, especially around the 6-mile house, you think? In February 1819, a local group of concerned citizens decided to form a vigilante group to force the gangs out and clean up the area around the 6-mile house. Okay, I can just imagine the group of drunk gentlemen that rallied together that night. That's a podcast in itself, what happened that night when the vigilante group got together. We're gonna clean up this here town. The vigilante group went door to door trying to flush out any desperados. One of those houses was the 6-mile house. Amazingly, no one noticed anything criminal at the Fisher's Hotel. I guess they didn't look or smell very hard. However, there were some suspicious-looking dudes staying at the inn who happened to be members of the Fisher's gang. They were asked to get a move on. So, believing they had accomplished what they had set out to do, guess that's it, we cleaned up this here town. The vigilantes quickly returned to their homes in Charleston, leaving a single man named David Ross to stand watch for any further criminal activity. Okay, now, how did that poor guy draw such a short straw and get the job of staying behind by himself? Okay, we've cleaned up this here town, but you stay here just in case. David, who the hell did he piss off? Well, early the next day, Ross was attacked by two men and dragged before the gang. Among them was Lavinia Fisher, who he recognized. He appealed to her for help, believing that she was seemingly a fine, upstanding lady, owner of an inn, someone with means, dressed real nice. However, rather than help him, she choked him and then smashed his head through a window. Oh, she was pissed. So aggressive. I can't help thinking she was showing some of her muscle in front of the gang, being a tough girl. That's some hands-on brutality. Smashing a dude's head through a window, all while wearing a corset, not easy to do. Maybe Lavinia did some of those stabbings herself after all. Amazingly, Ross managed to escape and immediately alerted authorities. Meanwhile, a traveler named John Peoples arrived at the 6 Mile house inquiring about an available room for the night. At first, he's told no rooms were free, but Lavinia still invited him in to sit down and stay for dinner. Peoples accepted the offer and ate his meal, and over the next several hours, socialized with Lavinia. Peoples couldn't help noticing that during all this conversation, John Fisher sat across the room staring at him with a weird expression. Oh, he was being vibed big time. Eventually, Lavinia left for a moment to speak with John privately and returned to inform Peoples that a room was available after all. Oh, surprise, surprise. She then offered him a cup of tea before bed. But check it out. John Peoples didn't like tea. You know, you're either a tea drinker or a coffee drinker, a dog person or a cat person, and Peoples was a coffee person. However, he didn't want to appear ungrateful, even though John was still giving him the weird eye across the room and the energy in the air was super creepy. He accepted the cup only to dump it out when his host wasn't looking. Classic. The Fishers thought Peoples had finished his tea and the usual would occur. Unsuspecting rich guy would drink tea. Check. Guy would feel sleepy. Check. Guy would excuse himself and go to bed. Check. The Fishers would hit the lever to the blood pit. Check. Wrong. Peoples started feeling an increasing vibe of danger. Oh my God, I can only imagine. He started to become suspicious that the odd behavior of the evening was a sign that he may be robbed in the night. So yes, he excused himself to bed, but he never laid down in the bed. He spent the night in a chair against the door rather than his bed, so he could be alert in case they tried to enter his room. Well, during the night, he was abruptly awoken by the loud sound of the bed collapsing through a hole in the floor. His intuition had been correct, and then some. He quickly escaped out of the bedroom window and rode onto Charleston to alert the authorities. Can you imagine how fast that guy booked it and ran out of that freaky house? Can you imagine being woken up in the middle of the night by the floor opening up and the bed rising up, releasing the smells of the pit? It's a horror show. There was no way law enforcement could ignore the victim statements of David Ross and John Peoples. No matter how great the reputation of the Fishers was, there was finally enough evidence against them to make a move. Immediately, police were dispatched to the 6 Mile house. But there was no way John and Lavinia were going out quietly. They planned on making a last stand. They barricaded themselves inside the residence with muskets and gunpowder. There were several gang members there with them as well. It was a standoff. This was only going to end one way. Outside, they were outnumbered by law enforcement and townspeople gathering in large numbers who were all armed with significantly more weapons. On February 20th, 1819, the standoff ended. John Fisher surrendered the group in an effort to protect his wife and shield her from possible gunfire. It was noted by law enforcement that this was done out of John's deep and utter love and devotion of Lavinia. In fact, when he was interrogated by law enforcement, he again attempted to protect Lavinia by identifying all the members in the gang. Oh, she had him so wrapped around her little finger. This is in part why I feel like she was the boss lady in this relationship and held her own as a badass in the gang. It's plausible that John carried out the killings in such a needlessly brutal way because his wife was nothing more than a creepy bitch. The Fisher property was thoroughly searched by law enforcement. A labyrinth of hidden passages were discovered in the walls, along with underground tunnels, allowing the Fishers to move through the property without being seen. Oh, it's so creepy. Oh, they definitely had creepy spy holes to watch guests in the inn. I get so creeped out when I travel for work, and I always inspect the walls and the Scooby-Doo portraits for peepholes. And in Airbnbs, I'm especially scared of hidden cameras. I blame the hidden camera thing on this guy I dated, though. He was a rock star that I will leave unnamed to protect the guilty. Anyway, it's date 3, and he invited me to his house to watch horror films. Now, I should have known that was code for date 3 sex, which I guess is an expectation of some guys. You know what I'm talking about. A lot of guys expect sex on date 3. Well, I'm naive because I went there to hang out and watch horror films. I'm a horror film geek. He totally lured me there with the promise of horror films. Very naughty. So the date began to quickly devolve after he had gone to the bathroom for the 100th time. He either had a UTI or a major drug problem, and I think I know which one it was. Well, he goes on to give me the tour of the house, which was really goth and cool, beautiful house. Then he showed me what I can only describe as the control room, where he had all of these videos of his exes that he showed me. It wasn't like sex stuff, but creepy surveillance style stuff. And he asked me to analyze their behavior, and it was just a little bit too much for me. Ever since then, I'm paranoid, always looking for the Scooby-Doo holes and avoiding rock stars. I'm sure after law enforcement witnessed the creepiness of the 6 Mile House crime scene, they were paranoid as well. Law enforcement discovered personal items traced back to dozens of travelers who had gone missing in the area. The poison used on the victim was also identified, although I couldn't find records of what kind of poison Lavinia used in her tea, and I want to know. File that in with the poison files with the nutmeg for future reference. Some say it was an herbal infusion that was known to cause sleepiness, like a super potent sleepy time tea. Most gruesome of all the discoveries, though, was what was hiding in the basement. They found the remains of over 100 people, making Lavinia Fisher one of the most prolific serial killers in America. At their arraignment, John and Lavinia both pled not guilty. Crazy, right? How did they think that they were going to explain away the blood pit with 100 bodies? Well, they never had to explain, because they amazingly were never charged with any of the murders of the 100 or more men. They were charged with highway robbery. The other members of the gang arrested with them were released on bail. However, and not surprising, the Fishers were ordered to remain in the prison until their trial. Eventually, Lavinia and John Fisher were found guilty on the charge of highway robbery, which at the time was still a capital offense carrying a death sentence. Perhaps it was a cost and time-effective move by the prosecution. Instead of sifting through a case that would take forever and have a mega price tag attached trying the murders of 100-plus men, let's call it highway robbery. The result is the same, a death sentence. The Fishers were allowed an appeal and given a reprieve until the following January. So for almost a year, they were held in the Charleston jail. Now, the Charleston jail is purported to be one of the most haunted places in America. I am going there as soon as I can. Lavinia's ghost is said to still haunt the building. Several people say they have seen a lady in white looking out the window of what used to be her jail cell. And many others claim to have EVPs capturing a woman saying, "Get out." The Charleston jail is a creepy place with a haunted history of its own, which deserves a show in itself, and I'll be sure to do an episode devoted to it in the future. While the Fishers waited for their appeal, the couple started scheming big time, trying to plan a jailbreak. After all, their cell had a window. That same window visitors claimed to see Lavinia's ghost. Also, they noticed the prison was guarded by some local bumpkins. Well, they thought they were local bumpkins, that they could easily outwit. On September 13th, they attempted to escape with a rope fashioned out of prison linens. You know, the old tie-together bedsheets to escape from prison trick? Not original, but effective. John went first and successfully made it down. But as Lavinia began her turn, as fate would have it, the rope broke. John was free, and Lavinia stared down from her cell at John. So what does John do? This is his chance to leave and start over. He could have pulled a Lavinia and reinvent himself somewhere else in the world. No, not John. He refuses to leave his wife and instead turns himself in. Now, if he wasn't such a creepy bastard, I might think he was actually a cool guy to stick by his beloved, but no. On February 4th, 1820, their appeal finds them no change to their fate, and the Constitutional Court rejects any further appeals. John and Lavinia Fisher were sentenced to death by hanging 2 weeks later. You see, that is the perfect amount of time for death row. Swift justice, in and out, highway robbery, murder 100 dudes, see ya. On February 18th, they were brought to the gallows erected in front of the jailhouse. This was an event, let me tell you. Over 2,000 people showed up to watch the execution. Let's put that into perspective. In 1820, the entire population of Charleston was 23,000, with the vast majority of those people being blacks who were enslaved. So I'm thinking all the white people in the area, men, women, and children, came eagerly to watch the hanging. Because nothing says wholesome entertainment like bringing your family to watch someone swing, right? Good times. John was scheduled to die first. In the last few minutes before his execution, he supposedly had found God and wrote a letter for his last words. Reverend Richard Furman read the letter to the crowd. In the letter, John acknowledged his acceptance of Christianity, but maintained his innocence, asking for mercy. Then, after the letter was read, John yelled out a plea for forgiveness for the wrongs he committed, in spite of just claiming his innocence. So are you guilty or are you not guilty? Are you sorry or are you not sorry? I think this is another case of a man saying anything to avoid the noose. It didn't work, though. He was immediately executed by hanging. It's Lavinia's turn. And in pure Lavinia style, she wasn't leaving this world without an exit worthy of her. This next part actually makes me respect her just the tiniest bit, because it takes mad balls. This chick actually walks up to the gallows, dressed to impress, in a wedding dress. She called out to the men in the crowd and announced that she was now available to marry. After all, she was available. She was now a widow, proved by the fact that her former husband is literally swinging next to her dead. Props to Lavinia, though. She knew that it was the tradition that married women at the time could not be executed. Marrying a man in the crowd who may be harboring some torch for her would have saved her life that day. Nice try. Creative even. But no suitors proposed to her on the gallows. After that, Lavinia did not go quietly to her death. She plain refused to walk up to the gallows and had to be picked up and carried. Apparently, she screamed and raved the whole time, undoubtedly giving the crowd the show they had hoped for. No one recorded what she had said, but I'm sure it was priceless based on her infamous last words. As the executioner tightened the noose around her neck, Lavinia used her last breath to scream at the crowd, "If any of you have a message for the devil, tell me now, for I shall be seeing him shortly." And just like that, this creepy bitch jumped off the scaffold before the executioner could carry out his job, dying before the crowd. Several witnesses attest that they had never seen such a wicked stare or chilling look than the one on Lavinia's face at the end. It would not surprise me that she made good on her promise that day and went straight to hell. Do you have a creepy true crime or paranormal story that you would like to share on Aimee Keeps It Creepy? I know you do. Please email a brief description of your story to info@creepypodcast.com. I can't wait to get creeped out. Thanks for listening.